Hello and welcome to the White House 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association. There are few places outside of the White House that are as deeply connected to the American presidency as where I am standing right now. For more than 90 years, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City has welcomed American presidents and first ladies, as well as world leaders and celebrities, through its elegant Art Deco doors right here on Park Avenue. Every U.S. president from Herbert Hoover has visited the Waldorf Astoria and enjoyed its legendary service and hospitality. A few presidents actually even lived here for a time, which is why the White House Historical Association is thrilled to partner on the creation of the Presidential Library at the Waldorf Astoria residences here in New York. This is a private amenity for the residents who live in this beautiful space atop the renowned Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The residences and hotel reopened this year after an extraordinary renovation and restoration that took almost 8 years to complete. Well, each book and artifact here in this first-of-its-kind library was hand-selected by our historians to highlight the people, the traditions, and the moments that have shaped the White House and its history. Together, these items bring presidential history to life for the residents. Currently, the Presidential Library is also home to a treasured piece of history, one of the rocking chairs that belonged to President John F. Kennedy. This rocking chair was gifted to the Waldorf Astoria in 1962, following one of President Kennedy's many stays in the presidential suite. In today's episode, we're going to talk more about this almost century-long relationship between the American presidency and the Waldorf Astoria. So let's head now to the theater, another wonderful amenity here for the residents to use. And we'll meet our guest. We'll be talking in front of an audience of White House Historical Association Next Gen leaders. Hello and welcome everyone for this special episode about the almost century-long relationship between American presidents and the Waldorf Astoria. Joining me today is David Friedland, a historian and journalist who has extensively written about New York history, including the book American Hotel, the Waldorf Astoria, and the Making of a Century. I'm also joined by Yasmin Howanitz, the executive director of sales at the Waldorf Astoria, who has a wonderful personal story related to this property. And David and Yasmin, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have a conversation with you and to delve into the history of this place more recently, but also going back for almost 100 years since it opened in 1931. So Yasmin, you started here 12 years ago, but you haven't always been at that property over these 12 years because it just reopened after an 8-year renovation. So tell us about that process of finding out it was going to close and what you felt about that, and then your time in coming back and what it was like to walk back in these doors for the first time.
I worked here for 12 years and the hotel was really not the most luxurious anymore those days. I think probably like a 4-star hotel. We had 1,400 rooms and it was an amazing place to work always, right? Because everything that we get to experience here at the hotel, everything that we're exposed to every day provides a different visit, a different excitement. We're very fortunate on so many levels, but the hotel needed a major restoration, and all these other Waldorf Astorias were opening up all over the world and really beautiful properties. So there was a little bit of jealousy I remember Waldorf Astoria Shanghai opening and I went to see it and I'm like, when is it going to be our turn? We're the original, we're the flagship. And so compared to many people who were very upset, really upset when they found out that this hotel was going to close, not just have a renovation while we're open, but actually physically close. Some people took that very, very seriously and were very upset and didn't know what was going to happen. I was actually on the team that I was like, well, finally, the hotel is going to get the investment and the restoration that it really deserves in order to continue to be the flagship for the hotel. So while obviously on a personal level, I had to find a new home, on another level, it was very exciting that it was going to be done the right way and that the hotel was going to get the attention and the investment and the restoration it really, really needed. And I think you can all see that it was well worth it.
Absolutely. So Yasmin, what was it like when you've been away and you come back in as the first employee? You walk through these doors. What was that like?
It's just pure pride that I got to be here again. It wasn't anything I could ever take for granted. I left the company and also wasn't sure it was ever going to be an opportunity again. And I did have to go through a rigorous interview process. But then on my first day, it was, again, pure pride and joy to be able to be part of this historic moment, reopening the greatest of them all, as Conrad Hilton refers to it. It's just very, very exciting to be part of this project, reopening this hotel.
Well, the hotel will be 100 years old in 2031, so we're coming up on its centennial year. And David, you've done tremendous research in your book about this property, but let's go back a little bit. There was a preceding property prior to this one that predated the opening of this hotel in 1931. Tell us about that history and the name and the connectivity of the Waldorf and Astoria and how that pre-existed and then came together here.
Sure. Thank you. Great question. So there was an original Waldorf Astoria that opened actually on the site where the Empire State Building now stands on Fifth Avenue and 33rd Street, 34th. And it was opened as part of the Astor estate. The property was owned by the Astor family. That opened as the Hotel Waldorf in 1893. And then 4 years later, the Astoria portion opened on what had been another Astor family mansion, that of Mrs. Astor. If anyone watches The Gilded Age, they'll recognize these characters, William Waldorf Astor and then Caroline Astor. And when that hotel opened in 1897, pretty much from the beginning, the two hotels operated jointly. So it became known as the Waldorf-Astoria. But by 1897, when the Astoria portion opened, the reputation of the Waldorf, the reputation, as a leader of society, of cuisine, entertainment, those three elements and politics had already been cemented. So the hotel just grew from there, grew in reputation, and the legend grew from there.
Well, we're going to talk more about current and recent presidents that have been here at this property. But going back to the predecessor property, there had been presidential history connected to that site as well.
Absolutely.
Give us a little bit of the flavor of that.
Well, from very early on, Stuart, the hotel cultivated relationships with dignitaries, heads of state, presidents. And so presidents were here a lot. Just to give you one example, Theodore Roosevelt in 1905 addressed the Lincoln dinner of the Republican Party at the Waldorf Astoria. And at that time, it was the largest Lincoln dinner given. There were 2,000 people. So it really stretched the facilities to the max. But there weren't very many hotels that had ballrooms large enough to hold big gatherings. So that's something that set the Waldorf Astoria apart from other hotels. But so many great speeches have been given at the Waldorf Astoria, and this was another one because in the speech, Roosevelt spoke about race relations. And one of the things he said, I'm paraphrasing, was that the duty of all Americans should be to lift every man up, not push some men down.
Mm. Well, there was also in that time frame, of course, about 20 years after Roosevelt, the 1924 political convention that was held at the Madison Square Garden,
right,
which is a different place than Madison Square Garden is located today.
There have been two since then.
Yes.
Yeah.
But tell us about that, how that really became the smoke-filled room part of the convention.
That's one of the most interesting pieces of the Waldorf Astoria history, I think, because it was in the summer of 1924. The convention was held at Madison Square Garden, and it just went on and on. It was the longest convention in history up to that point, and they just couldn't nominate anyone. And the big issue that everyone was fighting over was prohibition. And that was dividing the country. It was dividing the Democratic Party. And things became so difficult, really, in Madison Square Garden that the convention used spaces in the Waldorf Astoria to meet, to hash out differences, and to try to patch up a lot of the problems that they were having. Also, all of the candidates had their offices inside of the Waldorf Astoria. And one of the great ironies about it is that the big issue that everyone was fighting about, as I said, was prohibition. And those offices were actually on the site of the old bar of the Waldorf Astoria, which had been one of the great sites of New York, a very famous bar. But finally, what happened was the newspapers, which covered the events of the day in such meticulous detail, spoke about the Waldorf Conference. And basically, the Waldorf became the Madison Square Garden Democratic Convention in miniature. And it's just as you said, groups of several people would retreat into the so-called smoke-filled rooms to try to come to some kind of an agreement. And this is something that we see over and over again in the history of the Waldorf Astoria, where the Waldorf Astoria offers a space for people to come together, officials, delegates, even presidents, to come together and work through differences in a comfortable environment, a bit outside of the public glare.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yasmin, we see that in contemporary times with the UN General Assembly every September, where the delegations stay here. Tell us about how the Waldorf in our contemporary day is what David has described in its earlier days.
Yes, I think now from the more, I don't want to say local stage, but it moved to a global stage. And with the United Nations being so close to the hotel, I think that made a big difference. The infrastructure of the hotel with the number of suites, the number of rooms, I think all of that now, again, moved to a global stage, and a lot of head of states felt very comfortable to come here, but also accomplish the mission of, there were meetings held at the UN, but then a continuation was able to take place here, right here at the hotel.
So let's go back to the very beginning and the Waldorf Astoria, these two hotels that you spoke of. What was the style and the design and the feel of those buildings compared to the building that was built in 1931?
I would say that the style embodied 1893 in the way that the current Waldorf Astoria embodied 1931, what we now call Art Deco. The term had not yet been coined. But the emphasis in 1893 was opulence, a lot of decoration. It was also kind of a mishmash in terms of architectural styles. It was designed by Henry Hardenberg, who was one of the leading architects of his day. He was a big society architect. His last big hotel was the Plaza, Central Park South. So the Waldorf was designed to impress, especially in the early days with just the Hotel Waldorf. The goal was very much to pad on the luxury. It was to give society people a place where they would feel comfortable, entertaining away from home. At that time, it really wasn't such a common thing to hold private dinners outside of one's home. So the Waldorf became one of the first places in New York where it was acceptable to do that. It was even desirable to do that. And along with that came the other elements, came the cuisine. Very early on, the Waldorf established itself as a competitor to the fine dining establishments of the day, Delmonico's and Rector's and Sherry's. It was a restaurant on that level. It was a pace setter for those gastronomic ideals that a lot of people were pursuing in the 1890s. Then moving forward to 1931 and the current building, Lucius Boomer was the manager of the original Waldorf, and he was in charge. He oversaw the move from the old location on Fifth Avenue to the present location on Park Avenue. He was a visionary person, and the directive that he gave in terms of the design of the hotel was that he told the architect, Schultz and Weaver, another great architectural firm, that he wanted something that would be modern without being modernistic. And I think what he meant by that was that he wanted something that would be forward-thinking but would still honor the traditions of the the original Waldorf, which everyone knew. It was a famous institution within New York. And what wound up happening was one of the great Art Deco buildings in New York City.
Tell me the story about the clock in the lobby of the hotel now. Was it original to this building?
So the Waldorf Astoria lobby clock in the main lobby came from the original Waldorf Astoria, and it had been at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair.
Wow.
It had been exhibited there, and it was purchased and brought to the Waldorf Astoria. So that's one of a number of elements of the original Waldorf that have been preserved in the current building.
Well, Yasmin, I imagine there was quite a bit of anxiety when the hotel closed. Like, what happens to the clock?
Yeah.
Will the clock come back?
So the clock actually was one of the pieces that was first restored, and then it was on exhibit after it was restored at the New York Historical Society. So hopefully that put people at ease.
Yes.
And then I had the great pleasure of being there when it was reinstalled last year,
nice.
or earlier this year, actually.
Well, I'm amazed that the previous iteration of the Waldorf Astoria closed in 1929, which is the time of the Great Depression in our country. And this hotel opens 2 years later with 1,900 or so rooms. How did that happen? How were they able to afford to build this property? And what was the nature of its ability to hire people and to fill up these rooms? And what role did it play during the Great Depression here in New York?
Well, it's really a remarkable story because in terms of financing, the financing had already been arranged pretty much before the stock market crash of 1929. So the money was kind of there, but the bankers could have pulled out, but they were persuaded not to. They knew it would probably be some time before the hotel would start making a profit, and it was. It took until really the war years. But in terms of the significance of a hotel of this size, of a building of this size, of anything of this size opening when it did, not much was being built at the time. And certainly in terms of hotels of this size, there would not be another hotel of this size built for 30 years in New York.
It's amazing.
So but because of the significance of it, that's why President Hoover opened the hotel. He prepared a really wonderful address related to the history of hotels and kind of drew a parallel between the history of the United States and that of hotels. And he put all of this into his address, and he spoke of hotels as being community institutions, and which was very much the idea of a hotel in the 20th century. Hotel managers saw themselves as social leaders. So Hoover put all of this into his speech. It wasn't live. I mean, it was live, but he was in Washington. But it was like he was here because it was broadcast all over the country via NBC radio. So it's remarkable that he did this, but when you think about what was going on, he was very much trying to portray the economic situation, what we now call the Great Depression, as temporary. So the Waldorf served a very powerful symbolic purpose because he used it as a sign of better times to come. It didn't take that long for the hotel to be built, truly, because, well, the financing was there, but also people needed work. And materials could be had, building materials, the best quality, which we can still see in the hotel today. We were talking about the marble earlier. That was available, for a pretty reasonable cost. So the Waldorf Astoria symbolized hope in the future. And that's, I think, what was so significant about it opening when it did in 31.
So it opens in 31 with this long distance address by President Hoover, and then a year later he moves in. He was in 31A, I think it was, in the tower, and just before you closed, I had the privilege to stay in that space, and it was just an amazing connectivity with that presidential history that had taken place in that space. But pretty remarkable that a former president of the United States would live in this hotel for that amount of time.
Actually, in truth, every U.S. president from Hoover to Obama stayed here. And of course, there are so many different stories, but Truman spent a lot of time here, for example. He had birthday parties here. JFK stayed here a lot. I think if you look at sort of there's a line between a officially living in a place and then spending a lot of time and staying here. If you include the presidents who spent a lot of time here, it's a big number indeed. I think they very much saw it as a home away from home, and sometimes an office away from the office, because in the run-up to the 1968 election, Richard Nixon moved his whole family from the Upper East Side to a suite here. So he lived here during that time. He felt pretty confident he was going to win. So he prepared everything. He prepared the grand ballroom. So all those photos of you see him accepting the presidency, with the
yes.
were taken here.
Yeah.
But he also used it for his press offices. And the reason he had such a soft spot in his heart for the hotel was because it was here that he learned that he would be the vice presidential nominee. Eisenhower's vice presidential nominee. So ever since then, he always had a close relationship with the hotel. So, he was out, as we know, he was out of politics for a while. And then when he got back into it, he decided to make the Waldorf his headquarters, really both for home and for office.
Well, I imagine this is a site that's very familiar and comfortable to the Secret Service. And that's probably a benefit, too, for presidents to want to come here or to have things here because it is such a known site. Now, there's a story about a subway stop under the hotel. Is that true? And what's the history of that?
It's a fun one. A lot of people still ask about that. They want to go see it. An extension from Grand Central, a train track was built underneath the hotel, so the train could actually come right underneath the hotel. And that track is still there. And for the longest time, actually, the train car was still there too, I think about 2 years ago. But that train track 61, is still underneath the hotel, and that led straight to the hotel. And until we closed and all those heads of state that were staying here, actually, that was only the escape route for the American president. Yeah.
And it wasn't the subway, it was actually from Grand Central Terminal. So it was a railroad siding, a separate track that came from Grand Central. That was when people still traveled by rail.
Yes. So President Roosevelt would come, I guess, from Washington or from Hyde Park or wherever he was coming from and come up that to be underneath the hotel. So he was here quite a bit, it sounds like.
And Eleanor Roosevelt also, because she was so involved in society. If there was a charity event, sometimes she would be overseeing it. She was here maybe more than he was.
Let's talk about the standard and reputation for luxury that this hotel has now and certainly had then, and the importance of that and what that means and the pride that you feel in working here, and maybe why that attracted a presidential level of attention too.
I think a lot of it has to do with the service, discretion. Our staff really understands what the needs may be. I think also this has always been a place where you can ask for anything and you'll be able to get it. One of our mantras, there was a big sign in the back of the house that says, the difficult immediately, the impossible will just take a moment longer. And I think that's the approach you have to take, right? When you're serving and when you're taking care of guests from all over the world, royalty, heads of state, celebrities, you have to be ready for anything. And I think the service is a big component combined with discretion.
Well, there are few properties that actually have so many things identified with that particular space, with the Waldorf salad, the Rob Roy, the red velvet cake, so many things like that maybe not people may not know were either originated here or were early perfected here.
So Oscar Zierke he came from Switzerland, and he was hired by George Bolt to work at the Waldorf Astoria even before it opened in 1893. And he stayed with it all the way through the late 1940s. He had a lot of different roles, but mostly Oscar was the public face of the hotel. He was kind of like the brand. He was sort of like an 1890s, early 20th century version of a celebrity chef.
Interesting.
Even though he never actually cooked a meal, but he had cookbooks that he assembled from recipes people had given him. He was kind of the model figure. He also is someone who set down a lot of the policies about the training of staff. He created a lot of policies that were held onto by the hotel for a very long time. He was a tough fellow, almost militaristic in his way of dealing with employees, but he emblematized the Waldorf throughout much of the first decades of its history.
When an American president comes, what to this hotel, given the standards of luxury and cuisine that we've talked about, what accommodations does the chef in the kitchen have to make here to accommodate a White House standard or White House chef to serve the president?
The team works very closely with the culinary team from the White House staff, and they cater. It's very individualized and personalized. So it's not like you order off the menu. Maybe you like something off the menu, but all of it is customized, is pre-planned, and it's highly orchestrated. There's a dedicated, usually when we had the presidential delegation here, American president, there were usually 2 to 3 service managers actually on the group. One, mostly the director of the department, and then 2 more because of all the various needs, because there were bilateral meetings, then there were individual meetings, then you had to take care of the suite, maybe the first lady.
Yasmeen, let's talk about the presidential suite that so many presidents have stayed in and heads of state. When you were to walk into that space before it closed and has been renovated to become the Empire Suite today, what would you see and what would you experience in that space?
It was a 5-bedroom suite, actually. 35A was the room number. And when you kind of approached it, you would already see in the entrance foyer a plaque of many of the heads of state that had stayed there before. It's hard to keep up after a while. So, but there was a plaque that had listed a few of them. And then, obviously the double doors opened. And to some extent, even after some of the latest renovation, it really had a feel of, I did get to visit the White House before, and it has had the same kind of style and design of as it relates to the interiors. The entire suite, you had different memorabilia throughout the suite. And a lot of them were gifts that presidents, after they left the administration, left behind to kind of leave like a little bit of a thumbprint maybe in the suite. We had the rocking chair.
And that's the John F. Kennedy rocker that was gifted in 1962.
Yeah. And then all throughout the suite, you will find wall sconces that were gifted by President Nixon. The Clintons, I think, left, there was some eagle figurines that were situated in the bookshelf that were gifted. The dinnerware from President Ford. So those kind of pieces were displayed all throughout the suite.
Well, so many presidents have stayed here, and we have a nice, beautiful desk pin set here that was actually gifted, I believe, to the hotel by President Carter. And you have wonderful archives, which I want to touch on, but tell us about President Carter and his interesting story related to the hotel.
Yes. Joe Rantisi, who was the wonderful manager in the 1970s, a really great person, told me that every president had stayed here during his tenure. Well, Carter had not, because the presidential suite did not fit his ideals for frugality in government. He didn't feel that it was
right image, probably.
That's right. So what happened was, after Carter left office, I see the date on that's 77, but I'm sure he gave that in 77. But after Carter left office, Joe called and asked him, "Please come. We invite you. And we'd like you to stay here." And that way, Joe was able to create that plaque that read, "Every U.S. president since Herbert Hoover has stayed here."
Wow. Well, I'm intrigued by this plaque that's behind us, which commemorates LBJ, President Johnson, meeting with Pope Paul VI. And there's also a photograph of this. So it creates a stage for these coming together of important people. Tell us why that is important to this hotel, or even unique in some ways.
I think it goes all the way back to the original Waldorf Astoria. This hotel has always been a place where titans of industry came to meet, wine and dine, show off also to some extent who they were with, what they were wearing. I mean, Peacock Alley
To strut and be seen.
to be seen and be seen. And I think that all continued all the way, still to now, because of who came to the hotel, who has been here. I mean, Queen Elizabeth, kings and queens, and as I mentioned before, heads of state. And people want to be in a place where people like that spend time.
Right.
And I think to some extent also, because titans of American industry congregated and met at the hotel, others even from all over around the world wanted to be in a place of such importance and where that power was really present.
Do you have your own archives about the history of the hotel, and what happened to that during the time you were closed?
Well, I'm happy to share that the archives have been preserved.
Good.
We actually used to employ archivists here at the hotel, and there was a whole room that they had, and all of that's been preserved. It's currently still stored off-site, but we do have plans to establish kind of like a history gallery here where we showcase again, like we used to, in the lobby, showcase again and tell the story of how we got to where we are today.
Right. Well, I'm intrigued as well by the number of delegations that do stay here, heads of state from around the world during the UN General Assembly. So how do you make them feel all equal staying in a hotel when they all think they're probably the most important?
Yeah, I think that goes back to our staff being highly trained. Some diplomacy of who gets to assign to what floor, and then you know have to understand all of that. But I think the staff really understands that every guest at this hotel is important. Then another great advantage of the hotel, we have multiple entrances. Multiple elevator banks, so everything can flow really seamlessly, and everybody will feel like they're the only really delegation in the hotel.
If Herbert Hoover were to walk into the hotel today off of Park Avenue, would he recognize it after the renovation?
Yes, because I think certain spaces have been restored and they're landmark protected. So, for example, the Park Avenue lobby, when you come in off Park Avenue, that is a landmark protected space, and it's the same feeling when you walk up those steps. I think even better now, because really the space has been illuminated, brightened up, and just really meticulously been restored to what the original hotel looked like.
So
that was the mission.
It would be familiar to him.
Very familiar. Very familiar. Right. Very familiar. Actually, if he would have come in 2017 when we closed,
it would have been just like
probably he wouldn't have recognized it as much, because I feel like with this restoration, the whole intention was to bring the hotel back to what the original vision was for the hotel when it first opened in 1931. So wide open spaces, not like the velvet curtains that were covering the windows on Park Avenue. So much was covered. Some of the art at some point was covered. And I think with the restoration, when you come up those steps, you feel like when you first walked in, probably when the hotel
it's magnificent.
Opened.
It's really, really special. And the building where we're in today is the Residence Tower, and it has been completely redone as well. And we are now today dedicating the Presidential Library that we've been invited to curate here in this space for the residents of this tower. And our historians have put together a collection of our books and other biographies, works of art from the White House collection are replicated there. Even in this Christmas season, we have a tree with all of our White House Christmas ornaments on it. So it's very special for us to be invited to have this connection with the residents of this tower and to engage them in understanding a little bit of White House history, given the connectivity of this property with so many of our presidents. There's one thing that comes to mind, and that's the Waldorf was thought about as a place that to come to if you wanted to get a message out or to get a word out. What is that story?
I think that's very significant. There was, especially during the middle decades of the 20th century, what I would characterize as a symbiotic relationship, this is before social media, a symbiotic relationship between the Waldorf, members of the press, and political and social leaders, whereby anytime someone wanted to make a statement and have it disseminated to the general public, they would make it at the Waldorf. And we see that again and again. A great example of that is when President Johnson used the Waldorf, the stage in the Grand Ballroom of the Waldorf, to defend the recently passed Civil Rights Act. One of the best speeches I think that was ever given here. And it was a way for leaders to make a statement. and they knew that anything that was said at the Waldorf Astoria would get coverage.
So this platform gave it a gravitas because
Absolutely.
it took place here.
Yeah.
Well, there are certain events, or historically have been certain events that were annual here, like the Alfred E. Smith Memorial Dinner, which has attracted many presidents over the years. Will that dinner continue here now that it's reopened? It's happened already.
It happened
That's
already
great.
in October.
That's great. And tell us about why that has been an important mainstay at the hotel and why presidents find that important.
I think just for the same reason as David was just explaining. It's if you're trying to make a statement and you want to be heard and get a message across, you do it at the stage in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria.
Are there other occasions like that other than the Alfred Smith dinner that take place here that attract presidents?
During the United Nations General Assembly, sometimes multilateral events, sometimes National Day events that take place at the hotel. So it really depends. Sometimes former presidents are invited to speak at big financial conferences. Same there. Those hosts of those conferences, they
and
want
I imagine
to stand.
a number of fundraising dinners have taken place here over the years.
And then I think also a lot of social affairs. People want to make a statement. They want to have their children married here in the ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria. It makes a statement in New York society. And so we see a lot of that as well.
Well, before he was president, he was ambassador to the United Nations, and that was George H.W. Bush,
Right.
who as ambassador resided in the towers, this building that we're in today.
Yeah, 71 to 73.
Tell us about what that apartment and that setup was like. Where was it in the tower? And to represent America to the world on our own soil is a little bit unique, isn't it?
It was unique. As a matter of fact, Suite 42A was called by the press as the only American embassy in the United States. So that was it. It was on the 42nd floor, and it was used for many years. And that was where a lot of meetings took place, and a lot of issues were worked through in comfortable, private surroundings.
So it has history as well of American diplomacy and connectivity to American ambassadors. And they would host events and guests here in this tower. So there's no telling what types of things would have been discussed or debated or solved.
Incredible things. It was said that a lot of, especially during the 1980s, when arms was the big discussion, a lot of discussions happened there with the Soviet Union in particular, representatives of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, talk us about President Reagan and any meetings that he would have had here. Were there some in line with that with him?
Yes, he met with Margaret Thatcher here, and it actually was later determined that by the FBI that her life was in danger at that time. ASTI was the code name for the Waldorf Astoria. So he had meetings here. Obama had meetings here. There was even one meeting with both Israeli and Palestinian representatives. Yes. In addition to all of the bilateral meetings that he had with prime ministers and kings.
Wow.
And presidents.
Yasmin, how do you train staff to be around presidents and heads of state? How do you train them to be discreet and to be professional and not to be starstruck by them?
Well, I think it starts with hiring the right staff, and then there are standards. Actually, a lot of them were actually developed at the Waldorf Astoria and passed on through the generations, and I think that continues. I mean, it's almost like I want to say we take it for granted.
Right. It's in your DNA here.
It's in your DNA, and I think we hire staff that is has the right service and hospitality philosophy. I think we always look at, is this a job or is this a passion? And you have to have passion for hospitality and wanting to take care of guests, and then everything else kind of flows from there. But I think that's really important.
So when President Hoover lived here and actually died in this tower, in the suite, do we know anything about that occasion and what took place in terms of that process for his removal and burial and all of that confirmation of his death?
Well, the funeral took place, I believe, just across the street at St. Bartholomew's. There's been a relationship often between the Waldorf and St. Bartholomew's. I believe his sons were with him. He had not been doing well. He was 90 years old. I think beyond that, it was probably just like anybody else. But he apparently had stayed very active mentally. He had visited with Jacqueline Kennedy not long before, and Johnson paid him a visit. People would come to see him.
Well, it had to take a toll as well on the hotel staff at the time who had known him for so long, having been a resident here. I cannot imagine that it's like losing a family member, really.
I think there was probably a relationship between the staff and so many of the famous residents in the towers. MacArthur was a resident also. Cole Porter was a resident for many, many decades. So I know that there, from a lot of what Yasmin has been saying, it's more than just a job for so many people.
Well, I want to thank you both for sharing the history of this building, this property, this brand, the heritage that has been presidential heritage that's been woven through the tapestry of the years, more than 100 years, going back to when was the first hotel built?
1893.
1893 to here we are in 2025. That's quite a bit of history of our country that's represented in these walls and its predecessor walls, and certainly presidential and White House history as well, and sort of like the New York White House that we have here and has been for so many presidents. So thank you for sharing that with us today, and we're so honored to be dedicating this library today for the residents, and we look forward to an ongoing relationship and friendship and partnership with the Waldorf Astoria here in New York. And David, thank you for the story that you tell through this really wonderful book on this hotel and all the people. It's like with the White House. We talk about the building, but it's really the lives and the stories of those who have lived there, those who have worked there, those who have brought it to life over time that is so much a part of our mission. And so I can appreciate what you've done here with this labor of love of this wonderful hotel.
Well, I think thank you. I think something about the Waldorf has always been that the leadership of the Waldorf Astoria has always worked very hard to establish relationships with larger organizations, with government, with the United Nations, with leaders in politics. They've always had an expansive view of their role in society, and I think what Yasmin is saying speaks to that also, about the way employees have looked at their experience here. It's not just another job, it's something very special. And there's a reason that Conrad Hilton called it the greatest of them all, because it set a standard. You see again and again throughout history how other hotels look to the Waldorf almost like for guidance. Like, if the Waldorf is doing this, then it's okay. We can do that too. And in that way, as an institution, as an institution within New York City, within the country, within the world, the Waldorf has been able to make a big difference.
Well, it does make a statement that so many presidents of the United States have wanted to have a presence here, a visibility here, to use this as a platform for communications, as we have talked about earlier, but also to have the visibility of connectivity with this brand, which I think is fascinating. And it's interesting to study this and share this with you. Thank you both for joining us today. It's been fascinating to talk about the presidential history and the overall history of the Waldorf Astoria, such an iconic landmark, not only in this city, but for the world. And thank you for unpacking some of its presidential and White House history with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening and watching today. Be sure to subscribe to the White House 1600 Sessions on your favorite podcast provider so that you never miss an episode, and watch the video version on YouTube and Facebook. Your support of the White House Historical Association makes this work possible. When you become an association member, or when you purchase a book, or even the official White House Christmas ornament, you're helping to fund our education mission through teacher programming, publishing, our White House History Live, in-person and virtual events, and our latest initiative, the People's House, a White House experience. You know, we're bringing the White House and its storied history to life at 1700 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's open to everyone. So plan your visit today and register for free passes at our website, thepeopleshouse.org. And you can learn more about our work as a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization by going to our website, whitehousehistory.org. Thank you very much.